Hi again. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. We're going to go ahead and dive right into the caregiving crisis. Please welcome our speakers, Francois Mathieu, Executive Director at Tend, Reshma Saujani, founder of Girls Who Code and founder of Moms First, which was previously Marshall Plan for Moms, Robert Espinoza, Executive Vice President of Policy at PHI, and Shade Dozan, Chief of Operations and Development at Caring Across Generations.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be moderating our panel this morning, which is on such a critical topic, this issue of caregiving. I'm honored to be moderating it, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with our experts today. I'm going to start with a general question and dive right into the panel, which is that caregiving seems to be, if not the most pressing issue of our time, one of our most pressing issues. And I'm wondering, from each of your individual experiences, what do you see briefly as the key issues facing our caregiving system?
I'll start. Hi, everybody. Shade, she, her. So the fragments of the care system were felt long before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it was pretty loud and in front and center. And I think that was actually a tipping point in the national discourse that we needed to really visibilize the issues. So we've seen pretty momentous movement around the care and the national stage. There's the political landscape, there's the cultural, but I think ultimately there's a blend of the need for resourcing within the systems and an improvement and a shift in the values that we attribute to care.
I'm happy to go next. Hello, everyone. I'm Françoise Mathieu. I'm coming to you from Canada today, and I'm not only a CEO of a company, but I'm a caregiver myself. And I think a lot of us come to this with our personal and our professional hats. And so I'm a mother of 2 children in their early 20s. I have 2 members of my family who are neurodivergent. I'm part of the sandwich generation. We're dealing with forest fires right now. So that's why I'm actually not in the usual office. I'm not at risk, but it's the juggle of the, just racing around trying to make everything happen. And as Shade was mentioning, the pandemic massively amplified those challenges. And what the research has shown is that primarily the burden was on women, right? And we know that in terms of caregiver pressures. And I think about caregiving also juggling not only full-time employment, but unpaid labor and unpaid, domestic work. And what we found in my work over the last 3 years is so many people at this time are physically and emotionally exhausted. And we also know that in both of our countries, we have a rapidly aging population, and we're trying to keep everyone else healthy as caregivers while trying to have a successful career. And I think it's come as a huge cost for women.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to add to that. I mean, I think about this just in terms of, I guess, through a story. When I started during the pandemic, I was, founder, CEO of Girls Who Code. Half the girls we teach are under the poverty line, are Black and brown. And so many of them were off to major in computer science, but then their mothers were essential workers. And so instead of going to college, they had to stay home and take care of their siblings because we have a broken structure of care in this country and across the world. And so you really saw how this generational cycle of poverty happens, how we pull girls who are fully capable, fully intelligent, fully able back into the system, not able them to march up into the middle class because of care. And I think to the point that was just made by Francois is that it is a lot about women. 2/3 of the caregivers in America are women. 2/3 of the unpaid labor is done by women. When you look at who was displaced in the United States from the pandemic, 11 million women, mostly Black and brown women, were pushed out of the workforce. So when I think about caregiving, I think about equality and, women's equality, and the fact that it showed us that we were focused on the wrong things. For far too often, we've been telling women to fix themselves, get a mentor, get a sponsor, lean in, just, find a different partner, right? Just do better, be a better mom, right? And it's never been about that, right? We've been tricked, and so we haven't focused as a country on what is fundamentally broken in our society, which is the structure of care, whether that's paid leave, affordable childcare, elderly care. And I think that this is something I'm chairing the first ever Care Council for Davos, and this is something you're seeing vibrate across the global economy. So the opportunity for us is put care at the center of fixing our global economy. Put care at the center of fixing what's happening in America. One last thing, I'm going to be quiet. We have a lot of concerns about the recession and inflation. The cost of childcare is rising faster than the cost of inflation. So it was the best time to pass affordable childcare in our country if we wanted to solve poverty. So I'll stop there.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry, Robert. Can I just add a tiny?
Absolutely.
I know we have a lot to get through, but I so agree with what you're saying, Reshma. And, I'm an expert in burnout. And so we receive hundreds of requests from organizations who, were coining this alleged great resignation, which I ranted about online, so I don't have to talk about it today. But that's not what happened, right? What happened is a great realization, the great self-preservation. And there's so many workplaces that did not provide the proper flexible support that staff needed, primarily people who were in full-time caregiving and employed role. And the last thing I'll mention, because that's another rant I had online, is so many leaders said to me, people are not productive working from home. That is complete baloney. And my question is always, what kind of home, right? And I have written extensively about that piece, but burnout is not an individual problem. It's actually a systemic problem.
Thank you, Francoise. Shadi, I want to pose this question to you, building on Francoise and Reshma's comments, we know that the research shows that caregiving disproportionately impacts women, but especially women of color and immigrants. And thinking about this issue intersectionally, what do you think are some of the societal and cultural factors that are contributing to this disparity, and how do we address them?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I would start by saying that caregiving in this country has historically been undervalued, it's been underpaid, and it really stems from historically racist, patriarchal structures. It goes all the way back into our founding, kind of in the DNA of how America was developed, thinking about caregiving as the work of those that were Black women, enslaved women, and the devaluation of that is translated and rippled for generations, where many family care needs fall disproportionately on Black women. They fall on women of color. They fall on immigrant women. And it stems from the slave trade, even thinking about the white men and white women who were using physical violence and discriminatory laws. It's built into how we have created systems, and political systems in particular, to keep care devalued. Thinking about how care jobs are still poverty jobs, how they lack benefits and health insurance. So part of it is, one, the deep historical patriarchal racist embeds that we have in our system, the political structures that support the further devaluation. And again, like I mentioned around that narrative piece, this idea of bootstrapping, this idea of like that do-it-yourself mentality that creates this unrealistic false narrative, very centered in the you can figure it out on your own, when in all actuality, we feel like we're alone and we're failing, but we really don't have the supports that we need. So a little bit of culture, a little bit of political, and certainly rooted in slavery.
Thank you, Sade. It seems, this question is for all of you, it seems that caregiving is so expensive on people, on families. It's rewarding, but it's actually quite costly. Can you help us understand the full picture of the cost of caregiving in an unsupported, underfinanced ecosystem, and how deep and damaging do the spillover effects go?
I mean, I can just start for some of the stats I know on parents. I mean, we know that the model of childcare is broken in our country, and that so somebody has to provide the subsidy. We pay we pay zookeepers more than we pay care workers. I mean, the people that we entrust with whether it's our parents or our children, right, our most important thing, we don't value. And secondly, the cost of childcare is so expensive. 40% of parents today in America are in debt because of the cost of childcare. We just did most women in our country work to work, especially women of color. And so you don't see kind of the full actualization of people's potential because they're not actually in positions that they're capable for. They're having to downshift so they can manage their schedule. So that they don't have to, because they can't afford a daycare or there isn't a daycare seat or a babysitter. And so, the cost of care is simply untenable. Recently we've done some polling both with Democrats and Republicans. And what's interesting is there is actually consensus, irrespective of party, that our elected officials need to do something about this, that this is untenable for families. And again, I think it's always been this way. I mean, think about my own mother. My parents were refugees, and they came to this country with nothing. And we lived as one of the only brown families in a neighborhood that, quite frankly, didn't want us there. And my parents couldn't afford childcare, so we were latchkey kids from the time I think that we were 6 and 8. And I just think about my mother every day, and so every day we would literally leave our school and run home and lock the door. And I just think about my mother every day and how she felt at 3:30, knowing that her little babies, because they couldn't afford childcare, were having to put themselves in harm's way and that she couldn't do anything about it. And so many families today are having to make unconscionable choices because we refuse as a nation to do something about this.
Can I speak to this? I want to use a different angle. I was a latchkey kid too. I remember that well because my mom was a single parent. The way that we make the business case with organizations is to look at the ROI, right? What is the ROI of investing in supporting staff? And sometimes we also talk about the cost of ignoring it. And what we know is the other cost of caregiving in this ecosystem is that it's directly hurting organizations, right? So if experienced people leave, you lose expertise, you lose institutional memory and efficiency. You have new hires coming in. How are they supposed to develop confidence and competence if they don't have access to mentors, or they're working out with disengaged, cynical, burnt out colleagues? And what we know, and it's really easy to do the math, for example, in healthcare, I'm sure you all know this, but the cost of hiring a new worker is prohibitive, just the onboarding process alone. But when you look at the cost of hiring and replacing, for example, a critical care unit nurse, in Canada, the cost is between $50,000 to $80,000 alone, just the recruitment and the onboarding. So we know that the cost of having someone on sick leave is far greater than the cost of providing flexibility and accommodations.
I think about the cost in a couple different ways. So I take care of my parents, sandwich generation caregiver. I also have a young daughter. And then I also am a person with a disability. So I think about the long-term impacts and the trajectory of my own health, my own wellness, and the choices that I have to make in between paying for my medication and paying for my parents. The choices that I have to make around the time I spend on the waiting list trying to figure out how to get my mom a wheelchair, and the time I spend, really sitting in a doctor's office for 3 hours and like rotating around specialists. So I think about the cost of time, the time that I have left, the value of what we do within our system and how we're setting it up for the next generation, and the kind of system that my daughter is going to inherit. Is she going to be in the same cycle where she's making those same choices for herself because of my care? And I think about the cost of time. Yeah.
I'd love to add to that. So, we just had a meeting for our care council for Davos, and we were talking about like the different ways other nations are approaching this conversation. And one of the things that came up is that other countries like Latin America, for example, are talking about this in terms of a rights framework. So they're adding the right to care as part of their constitution, the right to leisure. Can you imagine, like, the right to like have a glass of wine and watch Netflix? You know what I mean? Is like something that we all deserve, like, right? Like we're all entitled to. And so it's just I think it's so important for us to like, this is a place where we as a nation have to look to other countries for inspiration as examples, of how they're thinking about this as a human rights framework, and we're still trying to like justify the economics.
Yes.
And it's just, it's wild, right? And so I think I push myself like, as a leader in this conversation, to be bolder, right? So like, I'm trying to collect my data to make my case and prove my point. And I'm like, wow, like as I was sitting there, I was like, we need to be bolder in how I need to be bolder, you know what I mean? And how I'm thinking about this and what we could be entitled to, what we deserve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Rajma, talking about bolder, I want to shift the topic a little bit to the kind of actions we can take to address this issue of caregiving. You started Moms First, formerly the Marshall Plan for Moms, during the pandemic. What led you to create it? Can you talk a little bit about the areas you look to change? And generally, why are moms undervalued in this economy?
Well, I mean, when I create, partly because of the story I told you, like, my girls in my community are my everything. And I really naively thought by teaching them to code, I was getting them to be able to march up into the middle class. And it wasn't until experience. I mean, I'm a mother of a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, so I'm in the thick of it. At then, I was the mother of a 3-week-old and a 5-year-old, and running a women and girls organization. And so for me, it was like, I can't finish the fight for gender equality until I finish the fight for moms. And it's similar. Why moms? Like, people used to always say to me when I started Girls Who Code, well, why girls? Don't boys have to learn how to code too? And I would say yes, but the problem is less than 20% of those of women in technology are women, and less than 1% and 2% of Black and Latino women are in tech. So it's about focus, not exclusion. Similarly here, yes, we all need to care, but the reality is who's doing the caring now are women, and Black and brown women. And we need to ask ourselves why, and we need to fix that. I believe you always build for the most vulnerable. And if you can solve for the most vulnerable, you can solve for everyone. And so that's our approach at Moms First. And yes, and we changed our name from Marshall Plan to Moms First. Look, I was like, because Marshall Plan for Moms is a little nerdy. I'm a nerd. I got it. But and it was funny because we were like, when we were thinking about what our new name should be, like, I mean, every name with a mom in it was taken, right? Like everything. Guess what wasn't taken? Moms First. Because the idea of putting a mother first is so radical that nobody wanted it, right? And so that is kind of the work for, right? And so what we're focused on is, we want to be, Moms First is a national nonprofit that's working on 2 major things: paid leave and affordable childcare. And we want to get those 2 things in as many places and spaces, by 2027. And the 2 areas of focus that we have right now are, one, on private sector engagement. So we've launched a national business coalition on childcare. We have over 40 companies now that are providing childcare subsidies, backup care, building daycare centers. But part of it is to change the conversation from childcare being a personal problem that you have to solve to an economic issue that companies have to fix. Again, the big dream is for the government to pass a bill, or for state legislators to pass something. But as we're getting there, we have to move business, because, as I'm sure Sade remembers, the people that stood in the way of that were companies. And so our job is to get them on the record, that this is something that is critical for American innovation. And it's been really exciting to see. We're talking about big companies, and what we're rolling out, not just obviously for salaried workers, but for hourly workers. And so exciting to see the progress that we're making there. And then second, we're building the largest movement of moms from a bipartisan perspective. Care is not a partisan issue. Actually, when you talk to Republicans and Democrats, the numbers are very similar in terms of wanting action. But there isn't an organization right now that is basically trying to mobilize that on both sides. And so we pushed for the launch of a bipartisan childcare caucus. Nancy Mace, she's a Republican in Rocana, we got them to come together. We took last Friday. We took an action on Monday. Our community now is 750,000 strong. We're almost at 1 million, actually. And so we took an action on Mondays to say, write your congressperson a letter and invite them to join this caucus. Within 20 minutes, we had delivered 1,000 letters. More than every single congressional district had been contacted. 20 minutes later, they've been contacted twice. So what this demonstrates, right, is that, again, moms who are so freaking busy in a moment where we're so apathetic that our elected officials can do anything, are saying, do something. And, my passion is, as we're moving in an election year, is to make this the voting issue. We may disagree on a whole host of other things, but one thing we're going to agree on is paid leave and childcare. Or I should say 2 things we're going to agree on.
That's great. Congratulations on all of that. Francoise, I want to ask you, you hinted at this earlier, this issue of stress, of burnout, of the emotional aspects of caregiving. It's very often an emotional endeavor for many caregivers. What advice would you offer caregivers about caring for their own well-being? And is there any nuanced advice you would offer the professional paid caregiving workforce?
Thank you. I actually have a book to recommend I'm very excited about in a minute. Yeah, I agree, of course. Paid and unpaid caregiver roles are obviously quite different, because if you're a helping professional, for example, you can switch jobs, right, and try and find a more supportive work environment. And that's not true when you're in an unpaid caregiver role. I wrote an article in 2015 called Beyond Kale and Pedicures, which is available. You could just find it anywhere. And I actually lost some contracts by writing it, because I was really trying to say, stop doing spray and pray. Stop just, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Stop offering wellness webinars, but not actually change people's work flexibility conditions and so on. So I'm fine with getting in trouble with that. And in this article, I interviewed healthcare professionals and leaders to try to expand the notion of what self-care really means. Since we're really short on time today, what I want to do is talk about the individual steps that we can take by recommending this beautiful book that I bet some of you have seen. I have no affiliation with this person, but it's called Real Self-Care by Pooja Lakshman. And she is a psychiatrist. And her book is so great because her real self-care recommendations are very simple, 4 basic principles. And the first one, which is really hard, is setting boundaries and learning to deal with guilt. And I also wrote about that. I wrote an article, these are all freely available, called Disappoint Someone Today. And I think that setting limits is incredibly challenging. As a self-confessed workaholic and overfunctioner myself, I struggle with that all the time. But then her second step was developing self-compassion first. And then she talked about getting clear on our values, and is what we're doing day to day in alignment with that. We don't always have that option. But the final one, which is so different, is collective action. And she talks in the book about how self-care requires collective action. But here's one last thing I wanted to mention. Caregiver guilt is real. And I don't know anyone who's in a caregiver role who doesn't struggle with finding some sort of harmony, balance. I don't think that exists, but all these competing demands. I'm going to tell you, my kids are now in their early 20s, and we recently had a really honest conversation about what was it like to grow up with a parent who was creating her own company and was traveling all over North America, ironically, to give lectures on well-being and compassion to other people. But you know what they also said to me is they said, we felt loved, we felt safe, we felt supported. And I think that we need to process our own stuff when it comes to guilt, if that makes sense. Like, we all have our own stories of receiving care from whoever raised us, like me, the latchkey kid. I never wanted to be that parent because that was really hard. And it might have been great or terrible, but we've got to do our own work as well as advocate for change.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for all of those resources as well. I look forward to disappointing someone today. So there's a lot of lessons, I think, that our country and our world are taking from the tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really highlighted the need for better support systems for caregivers. What are some innovative approaches that employers can implement to provide adequate support for caregivers, both financially and emotionally? And maybe, Sade, I can start with you.
You can start with me. But the first thing I thought about was we need employers to prioritize care, understand that care reaches everyone, and that most of us will provide care to someone, whether or not it's a child, a parent, a partner, a sibling. We are at some point in our lives either going to need to receive care or provide care, and that we should all be there for our families, both chosen in blood, and live those fulfilling lives at every stage. And I think about the role of businesses in particular to set the tone for the landscape of those working conditions. A few years ago, I was working at a company that was a little bit small, and I had found out that I was pregnant, and they were not legally required, because they were under 50, to provide paid family leave. And they made it very clear that it was a favor that they were providing me this leave, that I should be so grateful to have the opportunity to stay home with my child post-birth for a little bit. And I needed more time. I came back way too early. I wasn't fully healed. I was doing the best that I could, and I felt like it was my responsibility. And my employer kind of was like, like we did what we could. 6 months later, my daughter was around 6 months, my mom had a major heart attack. And then I again needed paid leave and couldn't access it because I had just used it that same year. So part of it is understanding that in that moment, I didn't have childcare. I needed more leave and didn't have leave. And then I also needed home and community-based services for my mother. So realizing that care touches everyone and it also doesn't happen in silos. It doesn't happen in a perfect cadence. And we need corporations to build policies that are reflective of how care actually operates and invest in them and show up politically for care. So we need both. Wield your power and influence to shift the care landscape.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, adding on that, I think we just have to have an entirely paradigm shift, right? And how we approach, women's leadership and gender equality to focus again on the structural problems, right? Move away from, like I said before, trying to fix women to trying to fix the structure. We did a report with Adecco about a year and a half ago, kind of offering strategies to both employers and employees on what that could look like. And so we had 9 of them. I will share 4. The first one is support employees with childcare, and I'm going to put /care generally. Implement gender neutral paid leave, eliminate the motherhood penalty, and embrace flexible and remote work. And so, again, on the childcare piece of things, we have to start thinking about childcare. Excuse me, the way that we think about healthcare. Historically, employers decided, I got to not only pay for your healthcare, but your partner's healthcare. Because if your partner gets sick, you're going to miss work. Almost 1 out of 4 Americans that passed last year were fired because of childcare disruptions. Childcare and the lack of it, quite frankly, in our country, is causing as much disruptions in many ways that healthcare is. And so from a benefits perspective, we have to put them on the same plane, right? And right now, only 6% of companies offer some sort of childcare benefit. That needs to change. And we're really kind of moving the needle on that. The second thing is gender neutral paid leave. Again, we need to talk about unpaid labor and we need to redistribute the ratio, right? If right now 2/3 of women are doing unpaid labor, we need to shift that ratio to at least 50%. So as Francois, you said, women can get back leisure time, mental health time, right? And companies actually have the ability to participate in that. I want to see every company have a goal of what's the ratio change, for our employees. How are we incentivizing taking gender neutral paid leave to performances, performance reviews, or to promotions, or to bonuses? Again, making this a company value. Eliminating the motherhood penalty. Right now, moms make 58 cents on every dollar. And I say to companies, this is an algorithm solution. I can send one of my girls who code and fix this for you tomorrow, right? This is not hard. It's like audit your pay and pay people fairly. Don't penalize them for doing care work. And it's not even penalizing for care work. It's who's doing the care work. It's when women are doing care work. When men have a child, they get a 6% increase in their salary, right? So we treat care differently, from a pay perspective on who's actually doing it. And, the last thing is flexible and remote work. For example, you had talked about this. This makes me bonkers, right? This is another example where people don't care about the data. They talk about the data, like DE&I, right? The data has shown forever, hire people of color, hire diverse workforces, hire trans, non-binary people, and you will actually produce more widgets, but people still don't believe it. And it's the same thing when it comes to remote work, right? It's like the data has shown there's been no productivity loss. In fact, there's been a productivity gain. But still, we are trying to get people back in the office 5 days a week, and making people feel like we're sitting at home watching Netflix instead of actually in doing work. And we're doing more work. And so we had this test case during the pandemic that proved that this actually works. We don't have to go back to the old normal, because the old normal wasn't working for anybody except for white men. But still, there's been this pushback, and every day you read about it. And so I think that we have to hold tight, hold strong, because everybody, men, women, dads, black, brown, white, gay, trans, we all want flexibility, and we all want the ability to work remotely. And so we just got to hold firm on our demands. And look, that's challenging, right? Especially in a market where you're seeing layoffs and contractions in the economy. But I think that like we're like, it's a critical battle that we're in the middle of right now.
For sure.
Robert, can I build on that quickly?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to wear my Canadian hat for 1 minute. I don't mean to be annoying. We have our own problems here. But several years ago, I was in a feminist organization in Connecticut, and they were so proud to give me a tour of their facility. And they said to me with great pride, "This is our pumping room." And as a Canadian, I was like, "Say what? What is that?" And they were like, "It's where women, go and pump who are breastfeeding." And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about, because as most of you know, probably, we have minimum 6 months maternity leave here. We have more. We don't have great parental leave. It's getting better, but a lot of women can actually take a full year with full salary or partial salary for a certain amount of time. But the fact that a feminist organization thought that it was a feminist act to have a pumping room just shows kind of the complexity of the problem. They were doing their best with what they had. I want to talk about some great work that's come out of the last 3 years. And Harvard Business Review has absolutely blown me away in terms of some of the quality of the articles they've written about this issue. And one writer in particular is called Jennifer Moss, M-O-S-S. And she wrote a beautiful book on burnout recently as well, integrating findings from the pandemic. And here are some of the recommendations. If you're in a leadership role and you're listening to this, we should be giving people personal days, not mental health days or sick days. Those days should be reason neutral. They should be offered to everyone, not just people who have children or relatives who need help. If you need to take your beloved dog to the vet, you should be able to do that and not have to justify it, so that you can stop worrying about your dog's health and be able to focus on work. Personal days are also things that we could take, even if it's that I'm going to go clear out my storage unit so I feel calmer and more able to focus, not just in a reactive process when we're sick. There's also a really good book that was written by Jeffrey Pfeffer in 2018. It was called Dying for a Paycheck, and he's a Stanford business prof. I'm hoping that Dr. Pfeffer has been spending the pandemic writing his second edition of the book. He had such great data to talk to decision makers about the cost of ignoring psychological stress in the workplace, and that absolutely fits in with the caregiver crisis.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have some really great questions in the chat, and I want to pose them so we have a chance to chat with our participants today. One person asked, right now I'm not providing care, but I know it's coming for me. What steps should I take to prepare myself and my family? Does anybody want to tackle that question?
Don't quit. It's interesting. I was talking to a behavioral psychologist at MIT, and he had done a survey of like, when is it that women in the pipeline actually leave? And what you find is like the greatest departure is 3 to 5 years in. And the reason they're leaving is about care, but they don't have any care responsibilities. So it's in anticipation. They look around, they say, wow, I don't think I'm in an environment that's going to support me. Nobody I see here has significant care responsibilities and is succeeding and thriving. So I got to find another place. And so what I encourage people to do is don't leave before you need to leave. You're actually at a great place to advocate. You know what I mean? And to design the workplace for how you want it to be. So if your company at that point doesn't have these benefits, or, and again, there's some talk in the chat about, you seem to be talking a lot about big companies, what about small ones? To me, what I tell small companies to do is, that's why flexibility is so important, right? Like if you can't afford a very generous childcare policy, but what you can do is allow people the flexibility when they have disruptions. And so I think it's when you don't almost have these care responsibilities is when you become the biggest advocate, and when you have the power and the influence, you know what I mean? And quite frankly, nothing at stake at that exact moment to actually really change culture.
Does somebody else want to take a stab at that question?
Yeah, I think the answer for both parties, the person that's about to start caring or anticipating caring, and then also the smaller companies, is be creative, utilize your voice. part of it, right, is that while we're working to build up the care system, while we're working to create a stronger infrastructure, we need an articulation of what actually needs to be adjusted, right? So flexible policies. We need to think about the expansion of how we define family, the way that we set ourselves up for supporting these folks. I think about everything from, having active conversations both in your home and at work about where care looks like for you, how you want to be cared for, how your loved ones want to be cared for. And the more we start to integrate it into the everyday dialogue, the less kind of like cloak and dagger, let's not talk about it, surprise it'll be when it happens. Care exists, it is here, let's have these conversations. So I would say a little bit of getting creative while we're building up the system, and then also using your voice to actively participate, sign petitions, get involved, educate yourself on the system, and work towards a better future with us.
Somebody else asked, what can people who don't have kids or caregiving responsibilities do to promote these policies with their employers? Does somebody want to answer that?
I'll just jump in. I think a great example of this for some companies is like IVF. So about 5 years ago, no company offered IVF. And then what happened is people started coming in, to their employers during the interview process, men, women, everybody, right? And said, what are your fertility benefits? And then HR went back to their CEOs and boardrooms and said, a lot of people are asking about fertility benefits. We better start offering this. That's what you can do. Is start asking when you have, when you're interviewing, what are your paid leave policies? What are your childcare policies? What are your care policies? What are your mental health policies? What are your, what are your policies? And the more of us that ask, the more it's going to be something that people are going to say, well, we better start looking into this. We better start providing this. I think a great example of this is mental health. When I was in the workforce, and I'm old, I could never imagine walking in being like, do you cover my therapist? But young people came in droves and demanded those benefits. And you saw this massive sea change, right, in mental health offerings. I saw this as CEO of Girls Who Code, where we have over 100 employees and thousands of part-time employees, in like the change in the benefits that we started offering as more people millennials started coming to the workforce and asking for things. And so for us, we have to find, and this is hard because I know, as a young lawyer, when I was interviewing for jobs, I was told, don't ask about that time. It was like, how do I balance life or family and work? And was told very clearly, don't ask that question. It's like now I read articles about how we're told not to ask whether you support remote work. And so all these things then are basically, it's like chicken before egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not asking for it. So then companies can justify, well, we're not offering this because nobody's saying that they want it.
Can I piggyback on that, Reshma?
Yes.
I can give you an example, Robert, of collective action, and then I'll tell you a quick story about my daughter who interviewed for law firms and what happened, which is really interesting. So I worked with a fairly large organization, like 300 or 400, not-for-profit. And their employee assistance program, their EAP, was pretty frankly, it was just not very good. And so what we did is I actually encouraged all workers to call the EAP and say, just ask questions about the EAP. And it was like one round. So the first 100 people called and the EAP was like, no, we don't provide X, Y, and Z. The second round of 200 people called and they're like, we're working on it. And by the third round, people were like, yes, we have that. Because it's also, I think organizations need to think about their insurance providers and so on. They are the customers, they're the client. So I think collective action is really effective in a grassroots level that way. Reshma, to echo what you're saying, so my daughter is actually Gen Z, and she was interviewing as a lawyer, baby lawyer, future lawyer, for articling positions recently. And it was so interesting because her generation, they are not interested in working for law firms who are not going to have a good workplace climate. And finally, she selected a law firm, she's in labor and employment law, who are actually all Gen X. They're no offense to boomers listening, but they're not boomer-led. Their partners are not boomers. They are Gen X and below. And she went to a boomer firm, or led by older white men senior partners. And she asked them, how did you ensure sustainability of well-being during the pandemic? And one of the senior partners laughed at her and said, if that's what you want, you shouldn't have gone into law. And my daughter was like, thank you very much. I'm going to go work somewhere else. Fatal mistake on his part, and quite frankly, his loss.
Absolutely.
Well,
Somebody.
I would love to
Sure.
chime in on that. Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
And I really echo Francois and Reshma's ideas. Francois, I think calling the EAP idea is genius. It's actually something that I did at a previous organization around a policy around commission for people while they were out on leave. It was cut off, and it was a policy that wasn't very well known, but it took collective action for departments and different branches to call and kind of question. And eventually the policy was updated. So I love that idea. But another thing I wanted to call out here, what can be done as someone that isn't a caretaker themselves, but is in the workplace with others who are, is I'm going to call it kind of like an interpersonal dynamic that I think really matters here. And that's actually supporting caretakers in a way that, is non-resentful. I've had colleagues, I've had clients that say, it's not fair that, this person gets a merit or gets a lot of praise when I'm here more than they are. Optically, I'm present more than they have been. It's not fair that my performance doesn't seem to count more, even though I'm physically here more. And I just think that's a really important, very ableist view to call out. And I think I ask people to catch themselves when they have those thoughts, because you might be physically there for now, but it's only really a matter of time before the tables are turned. And then you think about when you might need that dynamic, and you want colleagues that are going to give you an even share and even praise for the work that you do.
Yeah. And Jacqueline, to add to that, I think part of this is about culture change. Like I've had so many people also say to me, well, I don't have kids, so why should my benefits go to childcare subsidies? But that same person probably wouldn't say, I don't think that we should build a ramp for people with disabilities because I don't have disabilities, right? Or they wouldn't say, I don't think that we should do a training for on, buy it. You know what I'm saying? But it seems as though culturally it's okay to say that out loud about care. And that is what we can change.
Yeah.
We have to change.
That's what I'm saying about the narrative change part of it, is that the values that we currently have in our system is that it's very individual. It's kind of, you're on your own, you've got this. And we kind of are like, good job. It's like, no, actually, this is a fully systemic, collective issue that needs collective responsibility. And that goes from our policymakers to our corporations to even folks in Hollywood. Everyone needs to be a part of the narrative shift.
Yeah. And it's funny, I think about even I don't know, I'm on TikTok. I don't know if you saw all those videos about people getting mad when they had to move their airplane seats because families wanted to sit together. And you saw this almost yeah, I was the person who was I'm not moving. And actually you should be ashamed to do that. Right. You know what I'm saying? It just shows that we have so much, and this is what we do at Moms First too, is this culture change piece. And we did this at Girls Who Code very successfully. You have to change. The American culture is not with us. And we just need to realize that, which I have, and I think if you're a mom or, especially if young kids, that nobody wants me anywhere with my children. You know what I mean?
I need to jump in, Reshma, because I have to add a piece. It's quite provocative, Robert. I'm aware of the time, but many of you probably know the wonderful writer Gabor Mate. And if you don't know him, look him up. He's a wonderful physician, trauma, survivor of the Holocaust, thinker and writer about trauma and attachment. And I had the incredible pleasure of presenting with him twice. And he said to me a few years ago, he said, what I think is going on in the United States is because there is no proper parental leave. A lot of adults have absolute damaged attachment, and that does not allow them to have compassion for others that they don't see as close to them. And Gabor has been thinking and talking about that for years, and I honestly believe.
Please send us an article, because I need to understand what damage attachment is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Gabor just has written 4 different books, but one of his books is called In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, and it's a book about addiction. in the realm of the hungry ghost. He works with a lot of individuals in Vancouver who are Indigenous folks with multi-generational trauma, including addiction. He talks about damaged attachment. And as we know, that is toxic stress in the womb. That is about experiencing barriers, discrimination, harassment, not having access to proper health care, not having access to good quality childcare. So maybe we just pick whatever's around the corner because that's all we can afford. And that creates a group of adults who cannot experience empathy or compassion for others because they were not hugged enough from 0 to 6. And that is not their parents' fault. That's my short version.
Wow, thank you. We are nearing the end of this discussion, which has been remarkable. So many excellent points, and I don't know if you're all following the comments, but lots of compliments, great ideas, and questions that are coming up. I want to just thank each of you and all of you for your comments, for your participation, and for the work that you do. And again, thank you to Ellevate for hosting this conversation on caregiving, and thank you for everyone for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francoise, Jacqueline, Reshma, Robert, and Sade. That was amazing. Thank you again also to our incredible sponsors, Accenture, RBC Wealth Management US, Alliant, ABA, Diageo, DTCC, Mamava, National Grid, New York Life, NFP, Robinson & Cole, S&P Global, Suncommon, Tend Academy, Live Girl, J. Laura Vineyards and Wines, We Magazine for Women, Women of Wisdom Magazine, and Satin. Now, we're going to invite you to use the next 30 minutes for some one-on-one networking. It's what we do best at Ellevate, and it would not be Mobilize Women without it. You can navigate there by clicking on the speed networking on the left sidebar. You'll see it over there. You'll be automatically paired up with a fellow attendee for a 5-minute conversation, and you can feel free to switch around. Get in there and have some fun. We will see you back here on the main stage for a conversation about getting future-proofed at 11:30.